Imagine for a moment that the ground beneath your feet is not just solid rock, but a living, pulsating organism, feeling every step, every emotion, every collective thought that humanity carries. Imagine that, while we walk distractedly, worried about debts, social media, or petty personal conflicts, something much larger is silently watching us. It's not some something out there, distant, but the planet itself, a patient but not passive observer. What if I told you it responds to us? Not in words, but in movements, in storms, in subtle and sometimes violent shifts in the Earth's balance. If this were true, would you be prepared to hear what it's trying to tell you right now? Edgar Cayce believed this with conviction, not as a curious theory or a poetic metaphor, but as a profound reality. Called the sleeping prophet, he didn't make predictions based on deductions or assumptions. He plunged into trance states so deep that he seemed to cross invisible boundaries, exploring places where time bends and the future touches the present. From there, he delivered messages ranging from simple health advice to cosmic warnings capable of changing the way we view our place in the universe. Among these messages was one that resonates with increasing force as we approach August 2025. He spoke of a period when the Earth would tremble not by chance, but in response to what we have become. These would not be random catastrophes. They would be reflections, giant mirrors showing through physical events the state of our collective consciousness. For Cayce, volcanoes, earthquakes, and even shifts in the magnetic field are not mere geological manifestations. They are communications, reactions to a dissonance that begins within us and expands to everything around us. Consider the weight of this statement. It means that the choices we make as humanity, from wars to small acts of dishonesty, from acts of compassion to acts of cruelty, accumulate in a kind of invisible field, and this field interacts with the very structure of the planet. The question that arises is inevitable. What kind of response are we cultivating now? Today, strange signals are piling up like pieces of a disturbing puzzle. Ancient volcanoes are awakening after centuries. Earth's magnetic field is exhibiting unusual faults. Poles are moving faster than ever. And we're not just talking about cold scientific data. There's also something we sense, even without understanding, a heaviness in the air, a silent tension, as if we were living the prelude to something that still has no name. Cayce didn't see this as punishment, but as resonance. The planet doesn't punish us, it mirrors us. When we stray from harmony, it loses its own. When we divide, it fragments. When we forget what it means to live with reverence for life, it tries to remind us not with words, but with movements. But here's the point few realize. If the Earth responds to our consciousness, then it can also respond to our healing. Every act of integrity, every reconciliation, every compassionate choice is like a signal sent back to the planet, saying, balance is still possible. And if this is true, then August 2025 needn't just be a milestone of rupture. It can also be a milestone of transformation. However, the nagging question remains. Why now? Why this particular moment? Cayce spoke of cycles, of periods in which cosmic and earthly energies align in such a way as to amplify both our virtues and our flaws. And he believed we were approaching one of these points of maximum amplification, a kind of cosmic mirror, where nothing of who we are can be hidden. Perhaps that's why, even without knowing the prophecies, so many people today feel a diffuse unease, as if something were lurking on the horizon. It's not just fear of the future, it's the intuition that we're approaching a moment when our choices, both individual and collective, will be immediately and intensely reflected. If Cayce is right, then the question is not whether something will happen, but whether we will be ready to understand what will happen. Will we be able to read the meaning behind events, or will we be caught up in their superficial impact? Will we recognize the mirror, or will we continue to blame only external circumstances? The challenge is that preparing for this kind of moment doesn't involve accumulating material resources or planning escape routes. It involves a deep, silent, and often uncomfortable examination of what we carry inside. It's about asking ourselves, are my daily choices aligned with what I claim to believe? Am I building harmony or contributing to the dissonance I sense around me? And this is where the most dangerous micro-conflict comes in, the clash between who we know we should be and who we actually are. This conflict, often ignored, is what fuels the energy the planet returns to us. It is this conflict that, if unresolved, could turn August 2025 into a breaking point. But it is also this conflict that, if faced honestly, can transform the same moment into a turning point. Edgar Cayce didn't ask us to believe him blindly. He asked us to observe, to connect the dots between what we feel and what we see happening in the world. And most importantly, to take responsibility not only for our direct actions, but for the quality of the energy we put into the collective. As I write this, I can't help but wonder how many have felt these signs and dismiss them as coincidences. How many ignore the whisper until it becomes a scream. And I wonder, will we hear it in time this time? Perhaps the answer lies less in what the future holds and more in how we choose to meet it. Because, in the end, Earth will always respond. The question is, what kind of response do we want to provoke? And when August 2025 arrives, and it will, that question can no longer be avoided. There are moments in history when the world seems to speak louder, not with words, but with signals that, even silently, are impossible to ignore. Today we live in one of those moments. It's as if, beneath the surface of everyday life, something is stirring, gaining momentum. As we go about our daily routines, waking up, working, consuming news, discussing trivialities, there are immense, invisible, and inevitable forces reorganizing themselves. And if we pay attention, we'll see that they've already begun to manifest. Scientists observe, record, and make calculations. They tell us that ancient volcanoes are awakening, that Earth's magnetic field is showing weak spots, that the polar shift has accelerated. All of this is real, measured, and proven. But for those who look beyond the data, there's another level of meaning. Edgar Cayce said these signs weren't just physical events. They were messages. And messages have recipients. We are the recipients. Imagine waking up to discover that an entire city has had to be evacuated because a volcano that had been silent for centuries began spewing smoke and ash. Imagine living near a river and realizing that from one year to the next, its course has changed in an unusual way, causing unexpected erosion, or, more subtly, realizing that the seasons no longer follow their same rhythms. These are visible signs that something is out of balance. But how many of us connect these events to something larger? How many of us stop to consider what they reflect on the way we live? Cayce saw the Earth as a being that responds to the state of humanity. And looking at the world now, it's hard not to notice that we're sending mixed signals. We live digitally connected like never before, but emotionally distant as ever. We talk about progress, but inequality grows. We promise to protect the planet, but our daily actions continue to erode it. If the Earth is truly a mirror, what is she seeing in us right now? In recent years, we've seen wildfires consume entire regions across different continents. We've seen prolonged droughts turn rivers into rows of dry rocks. We've seen modern cities face historic floods in a matter of hours. And, at the same time, we've witnessed social polarization so intense that the mere attempt to engage in dialogue with those who think differently has become a battlefield. This scenario isn't isolated. It's interconnected. Cayce believed that humanity's internal tension creates external tension on the planet. You might be wondering, how could something as subtle as our collective emotions affect something as concrete as tectonic plates or weather patterns? The answer, according to Cayce, lies in the invisible connection between everything that exists. Just as our words can hurt or heal another person, the energy we emanate, individually and en masse, has a real impact on the environment. This isn't magic or superstition, but a living web of interdependence that we are only beginning to understand. To better understand, think about something close to your own life. Do you remember a time when the emotional climate of a place influenced your own state? It could be a home, a job, a city. Places where the atmosphere was charged with stress, anger, or fear felt heavier, more suffocating. And conversely, places marked by cooperation, care, and joy felt lighter, more alive. We can feel this on a small scale. Why would it be so difficult to imagine that the planet, on a global scale, also feels and responds to what we emit? The big issue is that, unlike a room or a city, we can't simply exit the planet when its weight increases. We're all inside the same living body called Earth, and if that body is showing signs of imbalance, it's not enough to simply observe. We must act. But action here doesn't just mean technical solutions, like reducing emissions or planting trees. Although those are also essential, It means changing the quality of what we put into the world every day. Cayce warned us to pay attention to recurring patterns. Volcanoes erupting on different continents at the same time, more intense than normal fluctuations in the magnetic field, rare planetary alignments coinciding with sudden changes in the weather. To him, these were warnings, like the distant sound of thunder before a storm, warnings that came not to paralyze us with fear, but to summon us to responsibility. The suspense hanging over August 2025 isn't just about the possible physical manifestations. It's about the uncertainty surrounding humanity's response. If Earth is truly a mirror, the reflection it shows will depend on our choices now. And it's at this point that history ceases to be just a narrative about geology or astronomy and becomes a narrative about us. Think about your daily interactions. How do you treat the people around you? How do you handle conflict? How do you consume? How do you dispose of? How do you contribute to the environment? Not only physically, but also emotionally. Every gesture is a reflection of this. And while it's easier to point to governments or corporations as the ones largely responsible, Cayce reminded us that collective consciousness is formed by the sum of individual consciousnesses. What makes this moment unique is the simultaneity of the signals. Never before in modern history have so many unusual phenomena occurred in so many places at once. It's as if all the voices on the planet, the wind, the water, the fire, and the earth, are uniting to say the same thing: pay attention. This isn't just about science or spirituality, but about survival and meaning. And here's the most disturbing detail. Many of these signals can go unnoticed by those immersed in rush, consumption, and distraction. It's easy to ignore the small tremor when you're wearing headphones, or the subtle change in the sunset when you're staring at a screen. But the Earth doesn't stop communicating just because we're not listening. So the question remains not just whether something will happen in August 2025, but whether we will be able to perceive what is already happening now. Because perhaps the prophecy isn't a single dramatic event in the future, but a silent, ongoing process that has already begun, and that, if ignored, will reach the point where it can no longer be avoided. This realization requires courage. It requires stopping seeing signs as isolated coincidences and starting to understand them as chapters in the same story, a story we are writing together with the planet, whether we like it or not. And like any story, it can change course, but only if the authors decide to change the narrative. That's why, when we talk about signs of Earth's awakening, we're not just talking about catastrophes. We're talking about opportunities. Opportunities to reconnect, to align, to choose differently. But as with any suspense, we never know how much time we have before the next chapter begins. And perhaps that's the most unsettling part of all. If there is one central idea that runs through all of Edgar Cayce's messages, it is the notion that Earth is not just a landscape in which we live, but a living mirror that reflects, amplifies, and returns all that we are as humanity. This view is unusual because we have become accustomed to separating matter from spirit, the physical world from the inner world. However, Cayce challenged this separation, asserting that the two are inseparable, two sides of the same reality, and it is at this point that his message becomes not only spiritual, but profoundly practical. If we want to understand the great movements of nature, we must first understand the movements of our own consciousness. Now think for a moment. What happens when billions of people live in constant states of anxiety, fear, and distrust? What happens when collective thinking is more focused on competition than cooperation? Cayce believed this created a kind of global energy field charged with tension. This tension, invisible to the eye, would be directly perceived by the planet. And just as a body reacts to prolonged stress with physical symptoms, the Earth would react with its own signals. Earthquakes, storms, abrupt climate changes. This perspective may seem far from common logic, but is it really that difficult to understand? Consider the impact a simple family environment can have on a person's mood. Homes where there is constant conflict feel heavier, almost suffocating. On the other hand, spaces marked by harmony and respect convey lightness and peace. If we can feel this on a small scale, what prevents the planet as a living system from feeling the same on a global scale? This is where a disturbing question arises. Are we sending Earth more signals of harmony or imbalance? When we look at the current state of the world, wars, inequality, environmental degradation, political polarization, it's hard to argue that our collective energy is aligned with balance. And if Cayce is right, The planet is simply returning the energy we emit, transformed into events that capture our attention in ways that are impossible to ignore. But there's one detail many people miss. This relationship isn't unidirectional. It's not just humanity that influences the planet also influences humanity. Imagine living in a place where the ground shakes frequently, or where the weather is extreme and unpredictable. Gradually, this shapes behavior, culture, and even the way we think. Cayce saw this as a cycle. Consciousness shapes the environment, and the environment shapes consciousness. In a constant dialogue, this realization raises another question. What if the changes we're seeing now aren't just responses to what we've already done, but also triggers for changes we'll make? In other words, what if the Earth isn't just reacting, but also provoking us to evolve? This completely changes the way we look at every earthquake, every climate change, every unusual astronomical phenomenon. Cayce spoke of how certain periods of intense geological and cosmic activity coincided with leaps in consciousness in humanity. He believed that moments of physical instability on the planet forced people to rethink priorities, join forces, and change habits. Think of recent natural disasters, entire communities reorganizing, people who had never spoken to each other before working together to rebuild what was lost. It's as if, faced with the non-negotiable force of nature, we were reminded that we are all part of the same destiny. And this brings us to a point many prefer to avoid. Do we only change when forced to? Does the world around us have to collapse before we finally choose to act differently? If this is true, August 2025 may be more than a milestone of physical events. It may be a milestone of internal confrontation, where the question will not just be, what is happening, but who am I willing to become in the face of this? For those who follow Cayce's work, it's no surprise that he directly connected humanity's spiritual state to the planet's physical stability. In his readings, he argued that the Earth could respond positively to a shift in consciousness, even if that shift came from a minority. It's as if a small group of people deeply aligned with values like compassion, integrity, and cooperation could act as a balancing point capable of influencing the entire system. This idea contradicts the common sense of powerlessness many people feel in the face of global problems. How many times have you heard or thought, "But what can I do alone?" Cayce would answer, "More than you can imagine." Because for him, each person is like a stone thrown into a pond. The ripples they create expand, touching places far beyond their initial point. Thus, the choice to remain calm in a moment of conflict, to speak the truth when it's easier to lie, or to help someone without expecting anything in return, is not just an isolated act, it's a ripple that contributes to the collective field. And here's a detail that can change everything. The collective field isn't static. It can shift rapidly, either toward balance or toward chaos. We've already experienced this. Global events that united the planet for a few days or weeks show that it's possible to create an unusual harmony. The problem is that this harmony often arises from tragedy. The challenge is to learn to create it intentionally before we're forced to. So how do we build this connection? Cayce believed it begins with the individual, but only gains strength when it spreads through networks of genuine connection. Not superficial social networks, but real connections, where there's an exchange of presence, support, and honesty. In today's fast-paced world, this is almost an act of resistance, stopping to truly listen to someone, offering help without ulterior motives, cultivating patience in a fast-paced environment. But are we willing to engage in this kind of resistance? Isn't it easier to keep rushing, consuming, and reacting, rather than taking responsibility for what we put out into the world? This question is uncomfortable because it forces us to examine habits we prefer to keep hidden, even from ourselves. And perhaps it's precisely this discomfort that Cayce intended to provoke. If we accept that the Earth is a mirror, we must also accept that it will show us both our best and our worst. And looking at current signals, it's impossible not to notice that part of this reflection is distorted. The good news is that reflections can change, but only if we change the source. And perhaps this is the greatest suspense behind August 2025. It's not just a matter of waiting to see if Cayce's predictions come true. It's about deciding now what kind of reflection we want to see when the moment arrives. Because, in the end, the planet will continue to respond. The question is, with what energy will it respond this time? We live in times when the surface of the world appears calm to the quick eye, but a deeper look reveals cracks everywhere. These aren't just cracks in the earth or in the infrastructure of cities, but fissures in the invisible fabric that sustains human life. It's the kind of rupture that doesn't explicitly appear in the headlines, but which we feel in our daily lives, in hurried glances, in superficial conversations, in the growing difficulty of trust. Edgar Cayce saw these signs as harbingers of something greater, not just isolated natural events, but direct reflections of an inner fracture spreading globally. Consider the past few decades. Technology's promise was to bring people together, but in many parts of the world, it has only increased isolation. Statistics show that, despite living in an age of hyperconnectivity, rates of loneliness and depression are on the rise. In some developed countries, more than 40% of young people say they feel they have no one to talk to about truly important matters. This isn't just a worrying statistic about mental health. It's also an indicator of what Cayce described as a loss of spiritual attunement. A planet that reflects collective consciousness cannot remain stable if that consciousness is increasingly fragmented. This fragmentation doesn't happen abruptly. It builds gradually, often without us even realizing it. It begins when we stop listening carefully and start responding automatically, when we prioritize convenience over truth, when we stop caring about the impact of our actions, because we believe someone, somewhere, will solve it. But the truth is that every choice, no matter how small, feeds the energy field that Cayce said was intimately connected to the Earth's balance. Real stories help us understand this more tangibly. In 2011, after the earthquake and tsunami that devastated parts of Japan, countless reports emerged of people helping one another spontaneously. Strangers shared food, families opened their homes to strangers, entire communities reorganized without waiting for official orders. Many Japanese said that despite the tragedy, they felt that society, for a brief moment, functioned as a single entity again. It was as if external pressure had realigned something within people. Cayce would probably say that this kind of human response has as much impact on the Earth's field as the event itself. But at the same time, there are opposite examples. In prolonged crises, when fear becomes dominant, we see an increase in conflict, looting, misinformation, and division. In these situations, the collective energy becomes heavy, dense, and recovery itself becomes more difficult. If we accept the premise that the planet responds to this energy, it becomes clear why certain places seem to plunge into repeated cycles of instability. There are also surprising facts due to their indirect connection to what Cayce said. Recent studies indicate that changes in the Earth's magnetic field can directly influence human behavior, affecting everything from sleep patterns to mood and mental clarity. During periods of intense solar activity, for example, there are reports of increased anxiety outbreaks, bouts of irritability, and even fluctuations in financial markets, not only due to the affected technology, but also due to the physiological and psychological influence on people. It's as if we are more connected to the flows of the planet and the cosmos than we imagine. This interdependence creates a new layer of reflection. What if Earth's signals are both a diagnosis and a treatment? What if every event we interpret as a threat also carries within it the seed of an opportunity to change the collective pattern? This presents us with a constant choice: react with fear and reinforce the cycle of tension, or react with awareness and open space for balance. It's impossible to ignore that, in many regions, the predominant reaction is still fear. Just observe how environmental or political crises are exploited to intensify divisions. Narratives that fuel hostility spread faster than information that promotes cooperation. Cayce would likely see this as a serious symptom, not only because of the division itself, but because each fragmentation reinforces the energetic pattern that maintains instability. However, there are signs that change is possible. Community movements emerging in a decentralized manner, environmental regeneration initiatives led by ordinary citizens, emotional support networks forming without relying on large institutions. These are small ripples in the collective realm, but waves capable of meeting and creating tides. The question is, will we wait until external pressure becomes unbearable for these tides to become dominant? Or can we consciously decide to expand them now? The suspense surrounding August 2025 lies precisely at this point. If Cayce is right, it's not just the planet that's approaching a tipping point, it's also our response to it. With every individual choice, we participate in a global pattern. With every conversation, every thought, every action, we add something to the collective vibration. It may seem abstract, but it's not unlike the cumulative effect of tiny drops forming a river. A river can nourish or destroy, depending on how it's directed. The earth, like a living mirror, will simply follow the flow we create. Perhaps this is why, even amidst worrying data and physical signs of change, Cayce insisted on speaking of hope and responsibility. He believed that a genuine shift in the human energy field could alter the course of events that seemed inevitable. And if this is true, then each moment until August 2025 is not just time passing, it is time shaping what is to come. In this sense, the question each of us needs to answer is simple but crucial. Am I contributing to the reflection I want to see, or the one I fear facing? Because when the time comes, there will be no way to separate what is a natural consequence of the planet and what is a direct result of who we choose to be. There's a central idea in Edgar Cayce's most profound messages that seems to gain increasing relevance as we approach August 2025. The notion that it's not the Earth that needs fixing, but us. The planet isn't broken on its own. It responds to the state of human consciousness, and how we react to the signals it gives us defines the kind of future we will build. This vision reverses the traditional logic, which views nature as something separate and to be controlled or fixed. For Cayce, healing the Earth begins with healing within. This concept becomes clearer when we observe how humanity typically reacts to global crises. Faced with environmental, political, or social problems, the first response is usually to seek external solutions. New technologies, system reforms, changes in leadership. While all of these have their value, Cayce asserted that these solutions would not be sufficient without a corresponding change within people. He insisted that true stability could only come from a transformation in the quality of collective consciousness. When we look at the world today, we see that most actions still stem from attempts to control the effects rather than change the causes. Environmental disasters lead to emergency investments to restore destroyed ecosystems, but rarely result in lasting changes to the behavior that caused the problem. Social conflicts generate temporary agreements, but they don't resolve the emotional and cultural roots that fuel the division. For Cayce, this approach is like trying to cure a symptom without treating the disease. The most important point of his message is that each person directly influences the collective field that shapes the planet. This means that we are not just observers of global events, but active participants, whether we recognize it or not. Our daily choices, the way we interact with those around us, the type of energy we emit in times of difficulty, all of this accumulates and becomes part of the frequency that the planet reflects back to us. If we accept this perspective, the individual role becomes more relevant. It's no longer possible to say that a small gesture is irrelevant. On the contrary, Cayce asserted that even a sincere internal change can generate real and measurable effects on the planet's balance. This may sound abstract, but consider the impact a single act of genuine compassion can have on a chain of interactions. One gesture can inspire another, which inspires another, and before long, a different pattern emerges in a group, a community, and potentially the world. This vision also challenges the mindset that responsibility always lies with others, governments, corporations, or religious leaders. It's true that these actors have great influence, but Cayce reminded us that collective transformation doesn't begin top-down. It begins where each person decides to align their actions with higher principles. This doesn't mean withdrawing from the world, but rather acting within it with greater awareness. In the context of August 2025, this teaching takes on special urgency. If we are truly approaching a tipping point, as he suggested, then each passing day is an opportunity to contribute to a more balanced collective playing field. It doesn't matter if you live in a big city or a remote area, whether you influence thousands of people or just a small circle. The quality of your presence and your choices carry real weight. There are historical examples that demonstrate how internal changes can precede significant external ones. Peaceful resistance movements, such as the one led by Gandhi, began with the personal conviction of a few individuals and ended up influencing entire nations. Communities that faced natural disasters and rebuilt more united demonstrated that human response can shape not only recovery, but also the prevention of new crises. Cayce saw these moments as proof that human consciousness is as important a factor as any physical resource. This leads us to a practical reflection. How can we cultivate a consciousness that contributes to the Earth's balance? For Cayce, the answer lay in daily practices of internal alignment. He wasn't just talking about meditation or prayer, but about constant vigilance over one's own thoughts and intentions, choosing patience over haste, honesty over convenience, generosity over indifference. All of these create small corrections in the collective realm. These small corrections, when multiplied across millions of people, can change entire patterns. The challenge is that this requires discipline and consistency, even when we don't see immediate results. Cayce believed that the real impact of these choices isn't always directly visible, but accumulates at a subtle level until it manifests in concrete events. Another essential aspect is the understanding that balance does not mean the absence of challenges. The Earth is dynamic, and physical changes will always occur. What changes, according to Cayce, is the intensity and the way we experience these changes. A more harmonious collective consciousness can soften events that would otherwise be more destructive. It can also transform moments of crisis into opportunities for evolution. This is a message that confronts the modern tendency to seek absolute security. Rather than trying to avoid any change, Cayce invited us to prepare ourselves internally to navigate these changes with clarity and purpose. This preparation doesn't depend on accumulating possessions or creating barriers against the world, but on strengthening the inner capacity to act with balance, even when everything around us seems unstable. And here's the most challenging part. This preparation is invisible to most. It's not something that can be measured by economic indicators or displayed on social media. It's a silent, often solitary task that only becomes evident when life tests our limits. At that moment, how we respond reveals how closely we align with what Cayce called divine laws. His final message was clear: don't wait for the Earth to change you. Change first, and the reflection will follow. This isn't a promise that no difficult events will happen, but the certainty that our experience of these events can be profoundly different if we are internally prepared. As we approach August 2025, the most important question may not be what will happen, but how we will get there, with fear or with clarity, with division or with unity. The choice is not theoretical. It is being made now, with every thought and action. And when the moment arrives, the reflection will be inevitable. The only question is whether we will be ready to recognize it as a fruit of what we have been, or as a warning of what still needs to change. As this journey draws to a close, it's impossible not to feel the weight and, at the same time, the hope that Edgar Cayce's message carries. He never spoke about the future merely to create fear. His words were invitations to responsibility, reminders that each person is a point of influence in the collective destiny. Now that we've traversed this path together, it's time to transform reflection into action, intention into practice, and make this not just an inspiring thought, but a routine capable of altering the way we live, and, consequently, how the planet responds to us. The central point Cayce left us is simple yet profound. The Earth responds to human consciousness. This means that if we want to see a different reflection in the world, we must start by changing what we carry within. To make this a reality, we need a strategic plan, not in the cold sense of numbers and goals, but in the living sense of habits, choices, internal alignment, and emotional discipline. This transformation requires constancy, because it is not the result of a single act, but the sum of conscious decisions over time. The first step is intentional silence. Set aside a few minutes each day to disconnect from the constant flow of stimuli. This silence isn't an escape, it's a realignment. In it, observe your thoughts and see if you're carrying resentments, fears, or judgments that weigh more heavily than they should. Ask yourself, does what I'm carrying contribute to the world I want to see? By repeating this practice, your mind becomes clearer and your reactions more balanced. It's in this inner space that the ability to respond to chaos without amplifying it arises. The second step is a commitment to integrity in small actions. It's easy to think of big changes, but it's through daily choices that we shape the collective landscape. Choose words that build rather than tear down. Keep promises, even the smallest ones. Avoid fueling unproductive arguments. Treat each interaction as an opportunity to stabilize the energy around you. When Cayce said that thoughts are things, He was talking about this energy we put into the world in an almost invisible but profoundly real way. Small, repeated acts become patterns, and patterns shape destinies. The third step is to reconnect with the earth in a practical and symbolic way. Walking barefoot on the grass, cultivating a plant, watching the sunset leisurely, feeling the wind on your face. These gestures awaken the memory that we are not owners of the planet, but part of it. This reconnection, however brief, reinforces respect and care, which then translate into conscious attitudes in everyday life. Less waste, more attention to resources, more harmony in relationships. The fourth step is to create networks of presence, not just contacts but genuine relationships, where there is listening, support, and real exchange. Collective consciousness is strengthened when there are centers of true connection spread throughout the world. Be the beginning of that center. Start with a small circle, but keep it alive. It is from this network that the support needed to get through difficult times without losing clarity emerges. The fifth step is continuous learning. This means seeking knowledge that expands your worldview. Reading, listening, observing, and integrating new perspectives prevents the mind from becoming closed in the rigidity that creates division. Spiritual